trunk opened, the same guy I saw outside of my school was right there. He grabbed my arms and he pulled me into the woods. I was making small talk, but I didn't try and irritate him. I told him I didn't know who he was, so I wouldn't tell anyone. He ignored me, but he said, "I'm sorry, I don't want to do this," and threw me on the ground. He fell on top of me. I fought him, trying to get him off of me. I grabbed his neck and I kicked him in the balls. He flipped off of me and I ran. I didn't stop running until I saw a telephone booth. I called the cops and they came immediately. The cops searched everywhere, but didn't find him. They didn't find him until 1978. I later learned that my kidnapper was the notorious serial killer Ted Bundy.
Forgive me for commandeering someone else's story here, but I think it's very relevant to the thread, and although my father wasn't a trucker, this incident closely involves someone who was. Back in the 70s, my dad was an 18-year-old gas station attendant at a 24-hour gas station. One night, Dad was the only one working the late shift when one of the sketchiest customers he'd ever laid eyes on walks into the station. My dad said it was really obvious that the guy was concealing something in his pants, and his first thought, which brings on some major panic, is that the guy has a gun on him. Now, a whole lot of truck drivers used to use his station for two reasons. Number one, it had a pretty roomy parking lot which they'd use to take naps and breaks in, and number two, it was the only place for miles around that they could get a bite to eat. Usually, there could have been up to 10 truckers parked up in the lot, but on this particular night, there was only one truck there. Luckily though, the guy just so happened to be in the store with my dad, but since Dad didn't know if he was armed or what kind of guy he was, he figured he was still pretty vulnerable. The weird guy starts walking up and down the rows in the store, and my dad can tell he's not really looking at anything. Most customers either come in to pay for their gas or went straight to the hot food counter to pick out something to eat. Weird guy looks like he's just biding his time before he pulls out his gun and robs the store. At least that's what's going through my dad's head. The trucker comes up to the counter while this is happening, puts down a bag of chips, and just so happens to look over his shoulder at the sketchy guy. Then, this moment of pure understanding occurs. The trucker looks at the sketchy guy, then looks at my dad, then back and forth maybe once or twice more, then asks my dad what was supposed to sound like a totally random question. He says something like, "Quiet night, huh? I wouldn't feel safe working at a gas station alone. You keep a gun behind the counter there or something?" All my dad had was a bat, and even so, it belonged to the station's owner, but the trucker widens his eyes and mimes a nod at my dad, who suddenly realizes what he's supposed to say in reply. "Oh yeah," he says. "I got a 45 right here. Always just in arms like the way." The trucker continues to play along and bangs his fist on the counter before kind of shielding the action with his body. "Oh yeah?" he says. "Well, check this out. 357 Magnum. Bought it after I saw that movie, Dirty Harry. Not as big a bullet as your 45, but it sure does pack a punch. Some days I just pray some SOB mess with me so I can blow his freaking head off." Right as he says that, the sketchy guy just makes a beeline for the door, gets back into his car, then zooms off down the highway. When the guy had left, the trucker turns back to my dad and says something along the lines of, "You know that guy was about to rob you, right? I was going to take a nap out back, but I think I'm more in the mood for coffee after that. Oh, and do yourself a favor. Call the cops." My dad says he always figured guardian angels would be all cherubic, half-naked winged ladies that descend playing harps or whatever. He didn't figure they came in the form of some hairy trucker who smelled like he hadn't showered in 3 days. But as he puts it, every day is a school day. The guy spent the entire rest of his break hanging around the store, making conversation with my dad until the cops showed up and my dad could file a report. The trucker confirmed the story too, backing my dad up when he said it looked like the sketchy guy had a gun stuffed in the back of his pants. Then get this, right in the middle of talking to the cops, both of their radios start buzzing, and they run out of the gas station, get into the patrol car, and speed off down the highway with their lights and sirens on. The trucker responds, "I hope our friend and his gun didn't find the trouble they were looking for." Only, they had. My dad said he read in the newspaper the next day that the very same guy, based on the description in the paper, had walked into another gas station about 10 miles down the highway. But unlike my dad, the clerk in that station hadn't been so lucky. The guy was the actual owner and operator of the station, who tried to resist the robbery and ended up paying with his life. From what my dad could tell, the sketchy guy pulled his gun, the station owner went for his, and the sketchy guy just pulled the trigger. Boom. Killed him behind his own counter. Now, my dad obviously didn't have a gun, but he said he was panicking just watching the guy walking around the store. If that was him getting robbed by someone with such an itchy trigger finger, he might have made a wrong move or something, and bam. I literally wouldn't even be around today to write this. I think the sketchy guy ended up getting the death penalty too. That, or died in some shootout with the cops. Maybe even the same cops who attended my dad's call. I can't quite remember which, but Dad always mentions him getting what he deserved whenever he tells the story. Now, I don't have to tell you how glad I am of that too, because even though it's so surreal to me, the idea of someone actually hurting my dad is just on a whole other kind of rage that I would feel. Dad's story doesn't just give me a belief in guardian angels, even if they do appear in unconventional forms, but it also makes me believe that there might just be something like divine justice, too.
My name is Uriel. This happened to me in Mexico. I would visit my grandmother and my aunt. I would usually go to check on my grandmother, and I would help her out with some chores that my aunt couldn't do, like yard work or things that had to do with heavy lifting. One day I was going over to see my grandmother and to see if my aunt needed help with anything. As I unlocked the door and entered the house, it was quiet, which was odd as my aunt and grandma would play music or have the TV on. Both are off, and I looked around the house to see if I could find my aunt or grandma, but I couldn't find them. But I didn't look in my grandma's room. How do I spit in my grandmother's privacy? I knocked on the door, but no answer. I knocked a second time, but it was quiet. I opened the door to see if she was sleeping. As I opened the door, I saw a lady dressed all in black, with her long black hair over her face. She was sitting on my grandma's bed on the edge of the bed. I didn't know who she was. I asked her, "Who are you?" She remained quiet. I asked again, "Who are you and how did you get in here?" The doors were locked and all the windows had bars, which made it impossible for someone to enter the house. I went outside to the shed to get my machete, which I used to cut the branches in the backyard. I was hoping to use it to threaten her so she would leave, but as soon as I entered the room, she was gone. I heard the front door opening. I went to see and found my grandmother and aunt coming back from a walk. My grandmother and aunt saw me and asked me why I had the machete out. I said, "There was somebody in your room, Grandma." I told them to stay where they were while I looked around the house to see if the lady was still there. About an hour goes by. I couldn't find nobody. I told them to come back inside. They asked me if I found anything. I said no. The only trace of her being there was the imprint of her sitting on my grandmother's bed. I decided to spend the night to make sure they were safe. A few days passed. Nothing happened until the next day. My grandmother passed away in her sleep. We held a funeral for her a few days after, but I couldn't stop thinking about the lady in black. I told my aunt about it. Her face was pale as soon as I told her everything. She told me what I saw was the lady in black. She is an omen of death. She's unknown if she's a spirit or demon, but she was the reason of my grandmother passing.
This happened when I was 21 years old. I lived in California and I was studying to become a doctor. In the post-mortem, as I saw hundreds of dead bodies in my college to be tested and to be operated. Well, in first time I freaked out when I saw a most disturbing side of a body. Then slowly I got used to it. It all started when I completed college and I was looking for a house in California. Well, I know nothing about houses and I got my parents to my room where I lived. We searched a lot of houses in online and in reality. After a week, we visited the website and we saw a really beautiful house for only $40 with 2 bedrooms and wardrobes. We were excited and we went to the house and knocked the door to the house. After 5 minutes, a tall lady who was in her mid-50s and with long hair and a cat in her hand opened the door. She greeted us and we saw the house. When we entered, a very foul smell was coming. It was something like which was dead and rotting. I looked around and I saw a very odd-looking voltage box in the hall of the house, and as I saw it, the smell got worse and stronger. I asked the lady what the smell was, and she said that a squirrel had died in the voltage box and she would clean it when we moved in. I thought this was normal and it happened in every house which was empty, so I shrugged it off. When we saw the full house, we liked it and we gave the advance and I moved in. After a few weeks later, one day, when my girlfriend came to visit me for Christmas, she liked the house when she came in and said that I was very lucky to get this house for a cheap rent. I nodded and my girlfriend wanted to use the bathroom, so I showed the bathroom and she went there. And after 10 seconds, she came back again to me and said that the lights were not working. I then remembered my electrician came yesterday to work on a switch and he had turned the mains off. So I went and turned on the mains with my girlfriend that's when my life was hell. My girlfriend screamed as the switch box opened and there was a person's body chopped into multiple pieces in that place. We then went to our landlady's house and rang the bell, and from the window a gun pointed and shot my girlfriend, and I called 911 and an ambulance for my girlfriend. The cops arrived in 5 minutes and they caught the lady. My parents arrived and my girlfriend was taken to the hospital and she survived. Then an officer said about the lady. Turns out she was a crazy psychopath who had killed a 30-year-old man and hid his body in our voltage box. What was even worse is she was plotting to kill me the day I found the body. I moved out of the house and I never ever want to go to that apartment again.
This happened to me a couple weeks ago, but it still haunts me to this day. This started when I moved into a new bedroom. It was really cool at first, but I realized I didn't have any pillows. I decided to make a pillow out of old t-shirts. I thought the room could use a funky pillow. It took a while, but when the last stitch was made, I was very happy with the finished product. Although I had made the decision to draw a face on it. The face wasn't creepy in any way, just a cute face. I called the new pillow Mushroom, and I really liked sleeping with him. Until he began to act strange. One day I went out to my friend's house for the day. I left Mushroom in an upright position on my bed. When I came back, however, he was nowhere. I looked everywhere until I eventually found him under my bed. It was very creepy because I didn't know who did it. My brother was at cricket, and I don't think my parents would do it. Since I like Mushroom so much, I just brushed it off and continued on with my day. To be honest, this happened repeatedly for the next couple of days. The weird thing was he always went back to the same spot under my bed. I still brushed it off, and I kept Mushroom. That night I was quite restless, always tossing and turning. When I eventually got up, it was 8 a.m. I looked around and I realized that Mushroom wasn't on my bed anymore. I looked under my bed, hoping to see Mushroom staring back at me. I sighed when I saw Mushroom in the same position. I grabbed him and yanked him up from under the bed. I looked at him. Something was different. One of his eyes that had been drawn on was wet, and the pen marks were draining down his face. It was very creepy because I had no water in my room last night. I was really creeped out, but brushing it off, I went on with my day again. The next night, I was tired and restless, not being able to sleep. I drifted off eventually and woke up early, only to find that Mushroom had gone under my bed again. This time, though, half of his face was wet and slowly draining away from his face. Again, I had no water in my room last night. I don't know how this happened. I really don't know what to do. I'm scared because I asked my brother and he is as scared as me. Someone or something is doing this. I really don't know why.
It may be hard to believe, but this actually happened to me. I remember when I first came to this house. It looked old and it was really small. It had wooden floors and it was a ranch-style house. The next day, my brother and I were sleeping when suddenly I heard some noise. It sounded like a baby crying. I thought it was just the neighbor's child and started to get back to sleep again. But then I saw it. It had a baby-looking face and made this scary baby sound. It had sharp nails and its body looked like an animal's. And then it said, "Adopt me, mommy," and let out a scary baby sound again. Then I blacked out. When I woke up, it was the morning, and I asked my brother if he had heard anything. He said that he heard a baby sound, but he thought he was just dreaming. I asked him what kind of dream, and he said there was a baby with an animal body and claws. Then I knew it. I quickly told our mom and we moved out. From then on, I never touched or went anywhere near any babies ever again, because it reminded me of that creepy thing that I saw that night.
Mm-hmm.